Greetings everyone, welcome to Nerd Scrolls. Today I'm going to be doing a first impressions on the Adventures in Middle-earth Player's Guide. Now what is Adventures in Middle-earth? Firstly, it is a conversion for the One Ring Roleplaying game. Now what is the One Ring Roleplaying game? It's its own kind of franchise that's based in the realm of Middle-earth, and it allows you to play through iconic locations, meet iconic characters, and make your own characters, your own storylines in the iconic settings from the books and the films. And it is I've never played it, but it looks like a good role-playing game. Now, Adventures in Middle-earth is a 5e conversion using the OLG rule set, or the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rule set, and it has its own twists to the rules to make it more fitting for the scenarios and the locations of the game, and it's generally really good. So I have the book in front of me, and I have its contents table up, and I'll talk you through all the different chapters. So the first chapter is the Warden chapter, and it allows you to basically read about the lore of the different locations. So as it says, Chapter 1 describes the area of Middle-earth where your first adventure will begin. Wildland in 2946 of the Third Age is a time of new beginnings, as the free people rebuild after the death of the dragon Smaug, and hope is rekindled, yet Mirkwood, the heart of the wild, remains a place of darkness and more danger, and who can say what the future holds. So basically, yep, as the first bit says, it takes part after the conclusion of The Hobbit and the twilight of the Third Age, or the beginning of Lord of the Rings, basically. If I got that wrong, my apologies. I'm just trying to remember from what the book says, but I'm to flick through pages. But it basically includes information from what happens and how the world's rebuilt itself after The Hobbit. And then it also starts talking about the different cultures you can play, or races. And that goes on stuff like the Dwarves of the Lonely Mountain, talking about the Elves of Mirkwood, Men of the Lake, Woodmen of the Wilderland, that kind of stuff. And then it just talks about a few locations, and then of course it talks about the Shadow, which is Sauron and his power. Then there is the cultures, which as I said are races. Chapter 3 covers the playable cultures that feature in Adventures in Middle-earth. Each has its own particular strengths and weaknesses, offering a broad range of play options, firmly rooted in the Middle-earth and Middle-earth play. Basically, it has a list. You have Bardings, Beonings, Dunedain, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Dwarves of the Lonely Mountain, Elves of Mirkwood, Hobbits of the Shire, Men of Bree, Men of the Lake, Men of Minas Tirith, Riders of Rohan, and Woodmen of Wilderland. So basically, Wilderland, I said that right, I had to double check. But it has a lot of iconic cultures to play. It gives a few twists, so there's a lot of human kind of twists, so of course human, but then the different versions of the human from the different locations, from Gondor, Rohan, and all the different locations. The dwarves you can play, I think you can actually pick whether you're from Erebor or the Iron Hills, so there's still the kind of the sub-races, you still have the different differentiation like you have them play as Handbook. And all of them, as it says, do offer their own strengths and weaknesses, so it's really interesting to read through all of them, and it goes into a lot of detail about their lore and the way it gives ability scores. So some characters will get more wisdom and constitution, just like you would in the player's handbook, but it's kind of really fitting if you look into the finer details. Now, secondly, classes. They don't have a change of name. There are a few, I think 6 entirely new classes, I think it says, and these are unique to Middle-earth and specifically designed to emulate the source material. So the one thing you'll notice is there is a significant lack of magical classes, because of course in Lord of the Rings and in The Hobbit and in that kind of lore, wizards are really rare and they're like really powerful. That's why you don't see wizards running around throwing fireballs everywhere. It's more of an extravagant thing that is more of a iconic character or an NPC, like a really important one, Patreon as you would in this, that supplies you with quests instead of an actual playable character. And so you've got, as it says, 6. A lot of them you can see where it's been converted from 5e. So the Slayer, or the Beast Slayer, so the one who takes on all the harsh creatures in Middle-earth, is a twist on the Barbarian class, as they have their own rage feature almost, that increases damage and basically gives you some form of protection while you're in rage mode. And you have other classic ones, so you have Treasure Hunter or Burglar, which takes on roguish characteristics because you still have the sneak attack, extra damage you get from attacking from behind, or if it's with advantage, I think. The warrior is the fighter, but it can have archetypes that go into a knight or a weapon master. So it's you can see where its fighter links is, so you could almost mistake it for the fighter class, but the twist it has is more Lord of the Ringsy, is more Middle-earth, and it is nice to see it. The Warden has paladin roots without actually being a paladin class, so it's all about protecting people without actually being a paladin, being someone who wears heavy armour and being right into the fight. The Wanderer is basically the ranger. You have I think the first one is you pick a land that you're comfortable in and that your character knows a lot about, and it's similar to the first level of a ranger class. You then get advantage when traversing these terrains, and this book has a lot of emphasis on the journey there, as of course in Lord of the Rings it's all about the journey. In The Hobbit it focuses a lot on the journey there instead of some of the actual events, and so you have to really focus on who's going to be the guide, and you have to pick this out. And for the ranger or the wanderer, they get advantage on their guide rolls if they're going for a terrain that they know of, and instead of like being a terrain like mountains or snowy regions, it's different regions on the actual map. And on the back of this book and in the front, it does actually supply a map, and it has all of the different regions of the Wilderlands that you can explore, and so you can pick from one of those at the beginning, and then of course they can go on to being where is it, the 100 Beasts or 100 Shadows, so they can pick their favourite enemy from them, or they can pick their favourite beast to slay, and that sort of thing. A nice twist on the feats is virtues, and you can get these at first level. You can actually get these while making your character instead of certain things. Some of them do actually allow you to take on, and you have open ones which are kind of universal for everyone, and then you also have ones specifically for the different cultures. So one for men of Rohan, riders of Rohan, and then different ones for men of Minas Tirith, and it goes into the different lore of them, and then it kind of picks routes that you might see while reading the books, and then you can have those, and most of them act as getting bonuses that they would. So elves can get bonuses on their ranged attacks and that sort of thing. The backgrounds still keep the same name as backgrounds, but they are different. So you've got ones, for example, you've got Loyal Servant, Driven from Home, Emissary of the People, Hunted by the Shadow. So you've got some really exciting ones that have nice twists. I think I had a go at making a character, and I used the Hunted by the Shadow background. It's just interesting. So your character has done something to really, in broad terms, piss off Sauron, and so he is now going to send his armies after you at all times. And so, wow, you're hunted by the Shadow. You're an important character, basically, is what I'm trying to get at. Equipment stays the same for a lot of parts. It's they don't change too much up. They have got rid of a few weapons and then added a few different bits of armor, and then changed it because, of course, in Lord of the Rings there's a few weapons that appear and a few that don't appear, and then you can go on from there. They've added a few. I think they've added a new shield and a new weapon. The weapon, I can't remember the name of it, it's used by dwarves, and then the shield, I think it might be a kite shield, and so it just adds it to flavour it up. The equipment has mainly stayed the same. You can buy standard like bedrolls and everything, but you can buy travelling packs for the different seasons because it focuses on travelling, so you need to be wary. And you can also buy different herbs that make more of an appearance in this. So if you get a certain herb and you crush it down into a paste, you can then apply it to a wound and you get a bonus. Or there's some where if you like weave it into a bracelet, you get luck. And then there's obviously pipes. One of my favourite features, which is a small feature but it's just really cool, is with a pipe, and if you have your pipe while you're doing an activity, you can choose to, if you're in a safe location. So the example it gave is a character is in a cave and there's some runes and he can't read the runes, they're all dusty, and the DC is really high. And so he sits back, smokes his pipe and relaxes while looking at the situation, and then if he succeeds his smoking roll basically, he can then attempt that same problem with advantage. And it's just a nifty little feature that is just, you sit back, you smoke your pipe and everything's more clear. It's quite simple, and it's not a large premise, but it's just really exciting, as you could put that into many different parts. Pardon me. Also, there are cultural heirlooms for each race, and so these are iconic weapons that you'd find on someone of of those cultures. Some of it you might hear about if you're reading the books, or if you're watching the films you might hear it being mentioned, and then of course that's something that you can pick up and use, or be gifted and then use throughout your journeys. And so, speaking of journeys, journey is a massive aspect, as I've mentioned already. Basically, they've completely redone all the rules for travelling, and they've focused more. So you've got more rules for when you set off. Do you have a good set off? Are you being followed? And then you have to make rolls while you're going through. And then there's actually, on the back of the book with the maps, it has a hex grid, and each hex is worth 10 miles. And so you plan out your route following along the roads, calculate how many miles that is, and then calculate, I think on average a player can walk per day 20 miles, and so you plan out how long it's going to take you. And it's just exciting, it brings more emphasis to the journey. As in Lord of the Rings, they had to literally travel so long to get from the Shire to Mount Dooms, and then Mount Doom. And so this emphasises it by, of course, playing in-game. It's going to take you a long time to get from one space to another. And even going through, because of course to get from one side to the other through the Misty Mountains, it's very difficult, and there's 3 different paths: the Mountain Pass, the High Pass, and the Red Horn Pass. And even going through the High Pass will take you 3 days, and it's just walking through a mountain pass. It's not that big on the map, it looks quite small, but counting the hex grids and then calculating the mileage, that's literally 3 days travel to get through the snowy regions, if you survive, of course. And so that's kind of the emphasis it puts on it. Of course in D&D it'll be, you pass through, maybe you have one encounter, maybe one roll, one situation that happens when going through, and then, oh, you make it to the other side of the mountain. But in this, you literally have to take those 3 days to move on, and depending on how long your journey is, so if you had maybe 15 hexes, it might be considered a long journey, and then that would be maybe 6 encounters you'd have. And there is a table that the DM will roll upon, which picks what scenarios they go through, which can be anything from coming across an ancient ruin to meeting an iconic character from the books. So this could be anyone from Gandalf to Frodo. And that's the interesting part. You can still bump into iconic characters, but it's like a really rare thing that happens if you roll the maximum roll on the journey tab. And so it's like you bump into this character and it's so awesome, because it's like everyone's like, oh my god, it's Gandalf, and everyone's all happy and excited. The shadow plays a massive part. This is corruption. It's a cool component for this rulebook, and basically instead of alignment you have a shadow weakness, and this comes from the different classes. So a Slayer might have the shadow weakness of Curse of Vengeance, where they're easily angered and they can then start to become more ferocious and then more murderous even, and to the point where they're just solving everything with pulling out and unsheathing their blade and killing everyone. And so basically the way it works is you have your shadow weakness. Now you can get inspiration points for role-playing your shadow weakness. You've got 2 ways of getting your inspiration points now: good role-playing in normal terms, and then actually role-playing your weakness, which will do bad things in-game, but out of character you are properly role-playing that character to the point where you're even doing what is bad, but it's what your character would do. And so you get shadow points by doing a whole lot of things. You can go through blighted areas, go through dark lands, which is like heavily infested by orcs, and that will cause you to get shadow points. And it's just basically the burden on your character's soul as he's doing all these adventures. And one of my favourite things is misdeeds now have a consequence. So in D&D, outside of role-playing standards, if you stab a homeless man or a random child, the rule's not going to punish you. Your DM might with a role-playing scenario, but the rules don't say if your character does this, he's like instantly a bad person and all that happens to him. But in Adventures in Middle-earth, every time you do something, you don't even have to actually do it, just thinking about doing it, and if you attempt to do it and it fails, you still get the consequence. So if you kill someone, you get like 5 shadow points. If you torture someone, 5 shadow points. If you steal some gold, like 1 shadow point or 3 shadow points. And so basically, if you choose to do evil things, you get the punishment of doing the evil things. Because, of course, you don't make an evil character. Your character starts off good, well, everyone starts off good, but with like a tainted heart, because it's the hidden stress in everyone's heart of the shadow. It's the shadow's always trying to find parts to exploit in the character, and the shadow weakness is what the shadow is trying to exploit. So treasure hunters or burglars have dragon sickness, which is what the dwarves suffered as Smaug was sitting on his bed of gold. and of course then that gold was cursed, and it was what played into the storyline of The Hobbit, and so you can get dragon sickness, and eventually that can start to lead to you stealing eventually. And so how it works, basically, I'll give a quick explanation, is with wisdom, with your wisdom score, if your shadow points ever go over your wisdom score, you become miserable. And as you become miserable, there are slight chances that if you fail a roll or if something else happens, your character goes into a frenzy where he becomes an NPC for a short period of time, and the DM controls him and forces him to do something against his character's will, and he performs his shadow weakness. Now as he does this, he gets a permanent point of shadow. Now for each shadow weakness, it has 4 stages. Your first stage will give your character a bad trait. They might be snappy, rude, or completely impolite. And it can go to tyrannical, murderous, cowardly, and as soon as you get the 5th point, your character becomes an NPC. Elves return to the elven shores to completely cleanse themselves of corruption. Men, dwarves, and hobbits, they're screwed. They're just going to go hide somewhere, die of starvation as they're hiding away somewhere, or become a bandit and goes and kills and pillages people and basically becomes a highwayman. So it gives 2 ways to fail. Your character can die, and they can just completely be corrupted by the shadow and lose their way and become an NPC. And I think it's such an interesting concept that you can go from having just the fear of death to the fear of being consumed by the shadow and just completely giving into evil deeds. And so it's an interesting part. One of the final parts, audience, basically sets that, of course, there's different relations with the different cultures, and so dwarves and elves, they're not the bestest of friends. So of course, if you're playing a dwarf and you go into an elven realm and you try and kind of seek audience and seek shelter, they might be a bit hostile towards you or unwilling to help you. And so it gives a table, and you find what your race is, and then you see how everyone else treats you, and this can affect how you seek audience, and this can affect if you actually get to seek audience or other things. So the final part is the fellowship phase. Now this acts as your downtime basically. So it says that adventure normally lasts for about a year. Now at the end of that year, you will then disband. The fellowship will break for not unfortunate reasons, but it will break, and then you'll go back home, or you might choose to go back somewhere together, but you'll go back home, and then while you're doing that, you'll rest, and you can choose many options from learning more information, cleansing yourself of your shadow points, or healing for a permanent injury, or just relaxing and just talking to your family and just making friends, meeting previous characters, or talking to patrons who give you your quests and everything. So it's really interesting that the fellowship phase has more emphasis on it. So yeah, chapter 11 features the fellowship phase, another new evocation, I think that's pronounced right, addition to the 5th edition rules. Fellowship phases give characters a chance to rest between adventuring seasons, return home, write a book of their adventures, or help the free folk reopen the dwarf road through Mirkwood. So basically it's what your character does outside of the adventures. Now that actually that's it for Adventures in Middle-earth. That's all of the different chapters summed up, basically. I know I said this was a first impressions, and I've basically done a vague review, since I haven't actually gone in depth about every single little bit. But that was just my first impressions of each chapter and how it was, basically. So I know this was quite a long video, I think about 17 minutes in the end, but I just really love this book. I've always been a fan of Lord of the Rings. It's been something I've loved since I was younger, and so to see a 5e conversion of a Lord of the Rings role-playing game, and the Lore Master's Guide's actually coming out in a month or two from the time of this recording, and that's going to have a bestiary, how to make your combat like it is in the books and the films, and I can't wait to get my hands on that book and read through it, because it's going to give more information, hopefully more areas of Middle-earth that you can go through, so you can add to your map in total, and altogether it is really good. I completely recommend everyone goes out and gets a copy if you're a fan of the Lord of the Rings and you want to actually see it be played out with the 5th edition rules. I also recommend that you look at the One Ring Roleplaying game, just to kind of see its source material. I know they have a few expansions for the One Ring, and it then kind of focuses on more detail that of course they're now converting over to 5e, and it is in general great game. I won't give it a rating, this isn't a review. This is my first impressions basically. So thank you for watching. If you like this, leave a like, comment and subscribe for more loaded content. I know once again I've been absent for a while, but I have actually been to college interviews recently, and I've been having to do a lot of revision and having to get a lot of stuff out of the way because this is a difficult time for me, as I mentioned in my other video. So if I'm absent for a week or two, it's because I'm having to worry about college matters or furthering my life or doing more revisions. My exams are now coming up in about 3 or 4 months, and I can't wait. So yes, I'll see all of you in the next video. Farewell, my friends.